welcome back to another episode of Coventry Confidential. I am Francis Lombard. In this episode, I have a returning guest. Fire Chief Bud Meyers is here to talk about the status of the fire department in Coventry, and also, because it is budget season, to talk about what's going on with the budget of Coventry's fire department. So welcome aboard, Chief Meyers. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's been a while since we last chatted, and it's good to get back in the realm of sitting down and talking.
Let's jump right into it. Actually, this past weekend, I was just talking to somebody I just met somebody who at a film festival who lives in Los Angeles. And I realized it's only been a year since that happened. And because I used to live in LA, I was reading stuff about how things just didn't get done or why things got done the way they did. And I came across this article a little while ago, and about the consolidation of fire equipment companies that provide. And I realized a year ago, I don't know if we really talked about it, but I did post the article that I came across, that this consolidation is an issue that even Coventry is dealing with. It really didn't help LA at all. There was a lot of equipment that was not used or available to fight those devastating fires. And I think you were down in DC addressing that issue too. Can you explain a little more? I will repost the article that I read about it, but go ahead.
So when you were talking about the LA, they had, I believe it was like 500 apparatus that was out of service, was part of that and there was the age of the apparatus, the parts weren't available for the apparatus, and they didn't have the manpower and the mechanics to actually keep these vehicles on the road. And they really had a hard time with that, and they came out with that article on that. When we were down in Washington, D.C., we actually had the pleasure of meeting with the Federal Trade Commission. They had 5 attorneys and an economist there to sit there and hear our issues when it comes to the 3 main fire apparatus manufacturers who have 70 to 80% of the manufacturing within the country. They were very receptive to us being down there. We talked about the issues of, the restrictive parts, meaning that only the manufacturing company are making the parts for their vehicles. They're not given that information to outsource for other people to make these spare parts, like you would with an automotive. The generic parts that are with your regular vehicles and stuff like that. Some of the other issues were the contractual, how long these apparatus. What used to take a year to a year and a half is now taking 3 to 4 years because they closed plants down. And that comes into tail, with our new purchase that we're trying to get passed through here. If we were to do this purchase 4 years ago, with the Quint that we're looking to replace and stuff like that, we'd probably be looking at 1.6. Now we're looking at 2.245 million to replace this apparatus.
Oh, wow. Yeah, in this article I read a year ago, they talk about because of consolidation that you can order something and then all of a sudden the price goes up upon delivery. Mm-hmm. And the municipalities have no pushback because it's the only game in town. And consolidation, hence, fair trade and everything, getting involved and trying to figure out how to fix things that they just dictate to you guys time, arrival, cost, everything. And there's a lot of surprises.
Yeah, and there is. And, I forget, back in February, I think it was, Senator Blumenthal actually held a press conference up at West Hartford that I attended. And, that was his take was, he was really looking for the Federal Trade Commission to look into this. And hence, when we were down there, we made sure that we had a meeting with them so we could, push the Connecticut issues even further with what's going on, through the trade. And some of that is we still are involved with them. We are getting them information about, contracts that were previously done before these smaller companies got bought out to contracts. Now, there used to be a clause if it did not build a apparatus within a specific amount of time and it went over the days, they would actually start reducing the cost of the apparatus. And now they're adding to the cost of the apparatuses and what they're saying is the steel's gone up or the work labor's gone up, and they're throwing all sorts of stuff out. But ideally, they're not reinvesting into their companies. And, we're talking they're making, maybe a 9% increase in their revenue off of all of this, and they're not reinvesting into plants or anything else like that to change it out. I will say, though, I believe Pierce has finally, and it might be done this year, they built a huge facility on their property to help with their issues of delay in time.
Now, I know you're involved in not only Coventry, but statewide because of what is the position you have that's statewide?
I'm the president of the Connecticut Fire Chiefs Association. I also sit on the Joint Fire Service Joint Council organization. It's a conglomerate of the leaders of the individual associations of the fire service. We sit on a council to work together to address issues in Connecticut, and we go down to Washington, D.C. to, speak with our constituents down there and others.
So this issue is about protecting lives and property. And do laws need to be passed to force these businesses to put lives and property over just, wholesale profits? I mean, this situation where you only have a small amount of companies producing equipment that is necessary, needed to protect people and save people. I mean, this is not just capitalism, making a buck. This is about people's existence and being able to maintain a home, and et cetera, et cetera. But, could something more be done? Does the state, federal government need to step in?
Well, I think it will be done through the Federal Trade Commission, to tell you honestly.
Yeah.
Okay. They're the regulatory power. Just like we're also going to be having a meeting when we were down there. We were trying to meet with the EPA to discuss the Environmental Protection Agency to discuss these emissions for the diesel engines that they're requiring fire on apparatus. They don't have these emissions, and that's a huge part of what is going on with my ambulances. Diesel ambulances, once they hit 100,000 miles, the one that we had that we replaced in 2020 had the same issues. After 100,000 miles, the DEF system seemed to disintegrate, and we just keep investing money into them and money into them. And when we talk about the DEFs, it's designed to diesel exhaust is what it is reducing, making it cleaner and stuff like this. It's also hard on the engines and the motors, and military doesn't have these requirements. And if you've seen the news lately, they actually EPA and President Trump reduced the requirements on farm diesel engines. So we're hoping we can work to relieve ours.
Yeah, because 100,000 miles is not a lot. And if you're holding on a vehicle for about 20 to 30 years, it really isn't a lot. So this is just I'm all for environmental protection, but I don't know, there has to be a happy medium, right?
Yeah, there does. And ironically, I think if you look into it now, California is actually finding that these emissions is creating, I believe it's some kind of ammonia, something or other, that's actually harmful for the environment also. So it seems like everything we can't find that happy medium where it's solar is great, but there's still hazards to our environment utilizing these new green energy efforts.
Yeah.
And we haven't found one that's perfect for everything we do.
So speaking on consolidation, the fire departments in Coventry were consolidated a few years back, and now that you've been able to move away from that, how is that working out? Was that a good decision? Were there any, or were there surprises along the way? Now that you've, I don't know how many years away from consolidation. 5. Yeah,
We're going on year 6 in
6.
July.
So, there was decades of 2 different fire departments, and now here we are for the last 6. How, was it a good call?
Yeah, it definitely was a good call. If nothing else, recruitment and retention in the fire service is very difficult to start with. And bringing the department together and having everybody working together, it's a much better avenue than separate departments.
Like, let's sort of get into um, like the budget. I was reading the material you're looking at, and correct me, I have $1.554 million budget request for the upcoming year. Is that for 27? Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So
That's everything inclusive.
inclusive, not
Yeah.
including, what are you trying to do on this budgets with this budgeting? Is it just to keep things running, keep in maintaining equipment, and then the fire truck that you would like to purchase, the Quint, is a separate issue?
Yeah,
That's correct.
the Quint and the ambulance are actually going to referendum the same time the budget is being voted on. So that's a separate issue. Our budget is actually very reasonable when we talk about my budget of what we brought in. It's 1.55, but if you look at it, we offset that with the next year. So this year's actually funds that come in, which is probably going to be probably right around 500,000 for ambulance billing. It comes in, and so ambulance billing, we're only taxing the taxpayers roughly, I think, probably around 33% of the tax dollars for ambulance billing, because the revenue we get from this year helps offset the cost for next year, and vice versa. Yes, we vote in on that budget, but there's funds. So I think they reduced the transfer from 288,000 down to 217,000 this year for the ambulance that would move over, and that's mainly due to the volunteers and the we created the live-in program that the live-in students that are here volunteering are helping out immensely, covering shifts, so we don't have as high as a staffing payout as we would if we didn't have those.
Yeah, I know in our previous conversation, we were talking about getting volunteers for fire departments is really a nationwide issue, that you just don't have the people signing up as much. But you're saying with the student program, which, was challenged a couple times, and, it saw some people, but it's really paid off, and it's allowed you guys, the Coventry Fire Department, to retain people and use volunteers in a different way.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So with the town budget, how much is the town responsible? Does the state kick in anything? How do we? Yeah, I see you laughing. No, this is just audio. But what is the breakdown of responsibility when it comes to this price tag?
So here's the breakdown. The state requires the towns to provide the services.
Okay.
Mind you, they don't have to have their own fire department. They could contract with other fire departments or other ambulance services. I do know originally, probably when we first took over the ambulance for the town took over the ambulance, they looked at a commercial service coming in, and commercial service was like, yeah, you can't afford us because there's not enough call volume for them to do that. To run keep an ambulance here 24/7 staffed. So,
Mm. Oh, wow. So, in a weird kind of way, because of being a small town, the profit margin isn't there, basically.
for a
So,
commercial ambulance service,
for a commercial
yeah,
ambulance.
yeah,
So
exactly.
then we have to either be sharing stuff with other towns or have our own fire department. And this is the state basically dictates that to us.
Yeah, yeah, yep.
Okay. So the state says do this. There really isn't there's no real grants coming our way. This is all based on um
We do try to look for grants and that sort of stuff, but the state, uh, when we talk about the emergency medical services in the state, their budget is only like, and it may have increased, but and I'm going to throw numbers out that was probably 2 or 3 years old, $250,000. We've been trying to get, if ideally, if our basic ambulance service, I can bill, I think it's right now, I can bill 1,100 and something. Don't hold me to the exact amount. I'm haven't looked at the numbers in a while. Where the private insurance, are your Blue Cross, Aetna, in your insurance, the state plan insurance, and so, all these other private insurances will cover pretty much 80% of that cost. When we talk about Medicare, which is the majority of our runs, they only cover 40% of that cost. So meaning I get 400 and something dollars instead of the $1,150. The same thing with Medicare is only 25% of that. I make like $90
mm,
on a Medicaid call. So if the state were to actually fund the Medicaid as well as the Medicare is, or the federal government increase the Medicare for ambulance services, we would be much better off. But they don't seem to listen to the people who are down at the DC banging doors and saying, "Hey, EMS is a sinking service. We don't have the funds coming in that we need to sustain that." And our call volume went up.
yeah.
Just our EMS calls alone increased 23% from last year to the previous fiscal year to this fiscal year.
And then the reason behind that is why?
People are getting older. We have when we have to transport to Hartford, that means that takes a lot longer to get in Hartford. Back up in Hartford, we've had ambulances sitting there waiting to get patients off our stretchers 45 minutes to an hour. That takes our ambulance kind of out of service, and our second ambulance runs, and we've had multiple simultaneous. Like this morning alone, where we staffed the second ambulance because we had two calls at the same time.
So when you say make from these various payouts insurance, you're talking about just reimbursement of cost. There is no profit. I want to just clarify that. When people
Absolutely.
listen, this is just to pay back for the expense of gas, staff, materials that are used,
Yeah.
Expendables, basically, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to cover those costs. And then the rest of that is not reimbursed by these organizations. The town has to make up the difference to staff and to supply the ambulance. Am I
Correct.
correct on that? Okay.
You are absolutely correct.
Okay. So with an aging population in Coventry of 12,000, I just want to go back because when people hear the budget thing, you're ask for this number plus I did not know there was going to be referendums for equipment. It's just a small town. And are other towns dealing with this kind of amount of money to, supply their fire departments too? Is this
So,
statewide?
pretty much statewide. The only ones that are capable of sustaining somewhat are the ones who are still all volunteer. that are running an ambulance. But even they need assistance in purchasing ambulances and equipment. They're not paying for staff, but they're not making enough funds to replace the things that they need to replace. They're just lucky that they don't have the call volume yet where they need to do staff. I mean, if you look at Willimantic, Mansfield, Tolland, their staffing levels have significantly increased over the years because of the call volumes they're doing.
Is that a paid fire department? The other towns? Yeah.
Yeah, all of them are paid.
Okay.
So Mansfield still has some volunteers, so they would constitute a combination. I think they got like 7 or 8 volunteers still. Here in Coventry, we're a combination department because we have paid staffing. Ashford's a combination department, paid staffing. Tolland's a combination department, paid staffing. Bolton, Andover, and Columbia are still all volunteer.
And if Coventry went more paid, it would just be, we'd be looking at a higher request on the budget, basically.
Oh, yeah. So, like I said, the volunteers have done a fabulous job in helping offset the costs of the staffing. Because if it weren't for them, you got to figure they put in roughly anywhere from, I'd say, 175 to 250 hours a month of volunteers covering the ambulance to make sure that it's staffed 24/7. So if you think about all those hours that would have to be covered by a paid person, that's quite a bit of money.
But when you're approaching the budget, how do the staffing, which will keep prices, costs down, of volunteers and have a robust volunteer roster, how do you incite, induce people to come over and do that? Because, I think in our last conversation, and I mentioned at the top of this, that there is a volunteer issue for fire departments countrywide. What are you doing to, retain people, engage new people, et cetera? What does Coventry really need to do in your eyes to keep this volunteer aspect, which would, keep the budget from blowing up?
Nice thing is one, getting them through the door. That helps. I think the town does well with incentives. One nice thing would be is if we could increase we have a LoSAP program. So when somebody turns 65, they can start collecting a monthly stipend. It's right now the max you can get is 30 years, and you can get a pay of $150 once you turn 65 at that 30 years. It would be nice, and actually it'd be nice to see a state retirement plan for the volunteers. That would be the best thing to go after, and that is something that I think we'll be looking at some point. They get a stipend to staff the ambulance, and that helps. I think keep the live-in students going is a big plus. That helped. That increased our duty coverage quite a bit, so much so that the part-timers that work here were like saying, we're not getting as many hours as we used to, which, I'm feel for them, but it helps the taxpayers save money by doing that.
Do you have an issue, with recruiting people, or do you guys feel comfortable with what you have going with all these programs?
It seems like we have people who apply to come in quite often, but it's actually putting in the work that it takes to be active is where it slows down, and when we talk about the volunteer fire service, there's a turnover rate of on average of 3 to 5 years because of several things. Family issues change. Some are joining when they're young and they create a family, or they move out of town. The cost of purchasing new homes is huge. That's one of the things the governor's looking at with his bill that he proposed. He's also looking at higher education, free tuition for people who are volunteering and providing, 5 years worth of service. They're looking at um, mortgages for volunteers at a reduced cost through the community banks through his bill. So we'll see if that helps. When the general spoke about the tuition, free tuition and stuff from the National Guard, he said it was a huge lift for recruitment and retention by doing that. So the governor's proposed bill, which is now, in the hands of it hopefully gets through and goes to the floor for a vote before the legislation session ends, will be, I think, a good avenue to start with for recruitment and retention.
What bill is this?
5046.
Okay. And it's regarding volunteer fire?
It's regarding police and fire.
Fire, okay.
Not only just volunteer, police and fire, across the gamut, volunteer career, looking to retain.
So, I mean, budget-wise, we were talking, wanted to talk about that. So on this budget, you have the fire department's budget, and then also you have equipment referendums. So when you look at the budget, I mean, and just in general, people who are listening to this for the first time, and wanting to make a decision on voting, you're trying to keep costs down. You have the consolidation. Sounds like you have a robust volunteer program. I mean, what else are you doing to try to keep the budget within a decent range, but that you can also do the job you're expected to do of having good response times, of being able to aid people, being able to protect property? How just provide an overview of what your thoughts are when you sit down and put this together, and the challenges that you're facing too on putting a budget like this together.
It's very difficult to when the voters of the town sit there and vote down what you already, like last year, I already proposed a budget, and then they come back and tell me I have to decrease my budget by a certain percentage again. It lessens the equipment that I can get and or maintain. My operating budget is bare bones at this point, and like I told the town council, I'm at bare bones. I don't really have any more meat on the bones of my operating budget too. And last year it was pretty much the same. And what ended up happening was, because the budget got voted down, they started eating into my capital. So my replacement for my Scott packs, for my firefighting gear, for hose. I just had to purchase. We are required by OSHA to annually hose test. I had to replace 13 lengths of 4-inch large diameter hose, and that was $13,000. I mean, and that sort of stuff comes from my capital that they cut down. So I couldn't buy anything else because that ate up the capital budget. It's small things like that when the budget gets voted down that starts hurting the overall. We have to. The state is actually proposing a bill that we have a state fire not a state, but a town fire protection plan, municipal fire protection plan. And part of that is because they're looking at these things where they're making sure towns are capable of providing the protection that's needed for their citizens. And that's going to come into play, and that may create a huge issue with the budgets if we can't supplement the things we need to supplement if the budgets keep getting voted down. Thank goodness we're not Bolton, where it got voted down 6 times, because
Yeah, I know that went really, that was like into July almost. Kept seeing signs driving,
yeah.
through Bolton. And I don't know, well, there's a charter review going on. I know that came out of the last budget vote. The town council enacted a board for that. So who knows? We're not lining up with the state budget that much. We have to come up with our budget before we find out what money we might be getting from the state, and other things too about, every time a vote, in Coventry, if the budget is voted down, the only thing you can do is cut. You cannot reallocate. You cannot increase. I know in some towns you can vote it down and saying there's not enough money. I think in Lebanon I saw that. It's like vote no because it's underfunded. So, but in Coventry, it's a no vote means a cut. And I don't think I think that's too simple of an approach, really, because in doing this podcast, I find the complexity of this 12,000, population is just very complex. So,
yeah. And some of the citizens don't even realize that because they come in thinking that if they vote no, they can go and get the an increase, and it's quite the opposite.
Yeah, having a secure budget is saying having the fire hose that work. That also shows to volunteers that there's a respect there, that I'm not going to get paid, but at least I will have the equipment I need to do the job I'm doing and to protect my life. Because we talked about this before, the exposure that you guys have to deal with. And also I like the idea of what the state, I'll have to look into that, about, providing a retirement because of, you guys are running into a burning building while everybody else is running out of it, and just the toxins that you're possibly exposed to. But just having all the equipment you need to protect yourself, that is an upside for volunteers. Am I correct in that?
Absolutely, you are correct. I can't stress enough that you want to add another, probably, if I had to put what is required to properly staff a fire apparatus, 4 personnel on a fire apparatus that to respond to the call, and we utilize our volunteers to do that. You're talking $1.5–2 million more of a budget increase.
So if there is a no vote, you would be cutting into your capital even more, like you already did.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Probably, because I really don't have anything on my operational side to make many more cuts.
And has this been happening? Are we reaching a sort of critical point with this? Because there has been plenty of no votes over the years when it comes to budgets. Is this been it's put you in this kind of situation? Has this been a slow burn, or is this something every time there is a no vote that happens to you? I mean,
well, sometimes it comes out of my operational, but like I said, I'm down to the operational. There's really nothing left to jump out of that, But
and operational is maintaining equipment and then going back in and everything.
Maintaining equipment. I got 4 firehouses to maintain.
Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah.
Right. So, I have my large apparatus. Average age of my large apparatus, my engine tanks, my tanker, my heavy rescue, my quint, is over 18 years. My average for my service vehicles that operate as an emergency for medical calls, to assist, for fire police, for brush fires, for dive calls, water rescue calls. The average age of those vehicles are over 20 years old. I have antiques in my fire department responding to emergencies.
And this goes back to the top of the conversation where you only have a consolidated amount of people who can replace that equipment. And then in some of the research I was doing is that this equipment is so unique. This is not produced on a mass, level that you can just keep it running. You can't keep these antiques running because things just aren't. You can't find the the parts for it.
Right. Yeah. That and that's and ideally that's how it works out too. Is that it's not just it's the age of these vehicles that the parts aren't available anymore. It just they're not there to be able to replace the parts. I can a while back in the fall, probably when the discussions of the Quint replacement of the Quint came up, a gentleman said he could fix the steering on the fire apparatus for $50,000. If he's talking about the steering box and the front steering and everything of my Quint, he that might be true, but we're talking about the all steer, which means my rear tires actually turn with my front tires, so I can get around the Lake District and these small narrow roads in town. Those parts are obsolete. So much so that Newtown has the same Quint, and they don't have all steer on their apparatus anymore.
That is the other thing, the factor that plays into, I guess, your budgeting probably, is that Coventry is unique. It has the lake, and then it also has, the farmland. I've said it before on this podcast. Geographically, there's a lot of miles to cover. There's a lot of land to cover in this town compared to a lot of other towns in Connecticut. It's one of the biggest towns in Connecticut. So that plays into also your budgeting and the equipment you need because there's various different scenarios that can pop up.
Correct. This town has grown. We over the 50s to the 70s, they were building 1,800, 2,400 square foot homes. At the council meeting, I pointed out to them that I have homes that exceed 13,000 square feet in this town, meaning that to me as a rural attack fire chief, that's a commercial building. And that's different fire tactics that you need for those buildings than you do for the smaller 2,400 square foot house when you're talking about a 11,000 to 13,000 square foot house.
On the budget, is there anything else you would like to say that people are aware of when they're trying to make a decision on how to vote for it?
I'd love to have them be more aware of the referendum, more so than my budget.
Oh, okay.
Replacement of our Quint and our ambulance is essential. We're looking to replace 3 vehicles with one purchase, meaning replace my Quint, my heavy rescue, and my engine with a purchase of one Quint. And that Quint is the one we have now. By the time I get a new one, will be over 30 years old. And the new one will look to last that. And I understand that 2.245 million is a big request, but it's a 30-year request. And if you look at if you look over the 30 years, that's less than a third of what it will be. The taxpayers will be paying for when it comes to police vehicles and public works vehicles.
As somebody says, well, we have 4 fire departments, stations, why don't we close them down? This is part of the consolidation that you guys are doing too. And some of the things I read that you're consolidating equipment and trying to,
Yes.
I guess, streamline things. So vehicles are doing multitask basically.
Right. And exactly what we're looking to do. We're looking to reduce the amount of iron we have in our stations. If the taxpayers would like to pick a station, because whatever station I shut down, your insurance is going to go up.
Yes, we had that conversation earlier. Yes, last time. So I'll ask people to listen to that. But we did talk about there is an influence. If you have a fire station right next door, Your insurance company looks upon you favorably. So yes, yeah,
And
with that old conversation. Yeah.
that comes into your insurance ratings and stuff like that. And property insurance has changed immensely over the last year and a half, mainly because of the hurricanes and the wildfires and all. Insurance companies want to make their money, and they're looking at everything. I had a discussion with the Merrill Road condos where their insurance went from roughly 70,000. They wanted like 250,000 to insure the property because of just the rates going up and stuff, and their inability to say what kind of fire protection they had. They were so, and I was capable of helping them out a little bit. Closing fire stations is if you look at the budget that I presented, I reduced about 7% in the cost of the fire stations. Our two outlay stations that help out the insurance ratings on those ends of town, and actually helps out with a faster response because I have volunteers over in those areas to mitigate the problems. It doesn't cost a lot to run those. It's our main stations that it costs a little bit to run, but where do I put all the apparatus by closing the doors?
Now, on the ambulance request too, is that basically replacing older equipment and also consolidation? Same issue with the Quint, that it would allow you to do that.
So,
Oh, well, why is that? Is it? I
no,
don't know the status of the ambulance.
so here's the status of the ambulance. That's been for 2 years now. We've been requesting to replace the ambulance in a capital budget that kept getting cut. Last year alone, between repairs of my older ambulance, we call it Blue, it was $40,000 for repairs to keep it on the road. Plus, if you look at how long it was off and the calls I missed, it's another $8,000 to $10,000 of revenue that we didn't have coming in by that ambulance being down. So that's roughly $50,000, which is about a fifth of the cost of a new ambulance. That because we're prolonging the purchase of vehicles, that it costs us as taxpayers, really.
So when you have to use mutual aid, the billing goes to the town that responded.
Correct.
Who did the coverage? Okay.
Yep.
So there is nothing for us, even though it's in Coventry and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, we don't. The transport ambulance is the one that does the billing. So both our ambulances, if they're out transporting, we can bill for them. But if it's in the shop and somebody else comes into town, they get to bill for the service that they provided.
So, Chief Meyers, I've had you on for a while. I was just wondering, is there anything else you would like to say as people start thinking about a new budget for the town?
Our volunteers really have already made their commitment to this community. The question is, whether the citizens are willing to make theirs to help, support the fire department.
It was great talking to you. Great catching up with you. Thank you very much for what you do for Coventry.
And I thank you.
Okay. Have a good day. I'll talk to you later.
Yep. Bye.